the tendency is for all of us to just bag the other side.
Yeah.
And so the result is, in my experience, if I go into the church and say, hey, guy, go to a deacon or an elder, or the pastor and say, hey, when we have our potluck, how about we don't use styrofoam plates? Let's use paper, or better yet, why don't we go down to the Salvation Army and buy a bunch of misfit plates and we'll wash them and there won't even be a trash bag when we're done. In the average church, they look at you like, what? What are you, some sort of earth muffin, commie pinko, tree hugger? And the problem is you can't even have a discussion.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Beyond Labels. I'm Dr. Stina McCullough, and I'm here with our favorite farmer, Joel Salatin. And I'm really excited about today's podcast because Joel recently gave a sermon and it resonated with me on so many different levels. He said so many things that I wanted to say, but kind of was afraid to say them. So I thought this would be a fantastic time to have this discussion on our podcast, since it's behind a paywall. So hopefully we won't get all the trolls. And what I really wanted to start with was, something that you hearkened on in your sermon was, does God really care what we eat, right? Does God care what's on our plate? And you're speaking to a conservative, and it got me really thinking about this concept that food is very political. You and I talk about the politics of the food supply, like in almost every episode, right? Like the politics run deep. But this has always been fascinating to me, is that at least in my lifetime, it seems like the political left have been on the side of trying to create a clean food supply, so much more than people on the right, right? In my lifetime, we considered it an issue of the left. And I've never...
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I grew up in a pretty, conservative Christian home, and all of our church friends made fun of the environmental movement, or anybody that would dare to save a tree, save a whale, save anything. And so I lived in this unbelievably whatever contradictory world as conservative Christians in our family, who did compost piles. Our church friends were these, very conservative folks. And then our farm friends were all these, hippies, back to the landers, bearded, braless, hippie folks who at that time, we're talking about late 60s, early 70s, when I was a teenager, and these folks were, it was common to have them, smoking marijuana joints and stuff at our house, but we loved them. That's who energized us on the farm. They were interested in what we were doing, and all that. And our church friends were not. And I didn't think a lot of it until I got a little older and realized the juxtaposition of these two things. And for those who are, would like to see that sermon, all you have to do is Google up the Vineyard Church for Wheeling, West Virginia, the Vineyard Church, and they've got it on there, the whole thing, and you can see it yourself and hear it. And for me, it was just a wonderful opportunity. This church scene, just a bit of a background. Chris Figueretti, the senior pastor there, he and I have been friends now for several years. And this church, if you can imagine it, one of their things that they did about 3 years ago, they paid for and did the labor to install school gardens in every school district of their area.
Wow.
I don't know how many they put in. It was a bunch of them. And so, I have just come to really love Chris and what he's trying to do there with the group. And so it was just a privilege and an honor to be able to share with him. But I know I know that it's still, even in that kind of a group, this kind of thinking pushes, it pushes conservatives.
Yes, yes. And it's so interesting. And I'm thinking you probably feel somewhat similar. I feel like I'm stuck in between these two worlds, like not really fitting in to either side, because we've tried many, many churches in our journey. And of all of the churches that we've been to, the food was not on the forefront. This was not an issue for them. We would, like my children would go into the Awana program and they would reward them with, candy for memorizing Bible verses. And it wasn't even healthy candy. It was, the junk candy, right? And all
Right,
the
right.
they
Yeah,
would have ice cream parties for them with the junk ice cream. The potlucks would all be junk, but then on the flip side, all of my friends who are, conservative, they find out that, oh, you eat organic food, and they start calling me like this California tree hugging, granola eating hippie. And I'm like, wow, look at all the labels being thrown at me just because I'm trying to provide health for my family. So you're really stuck between these two worlds where you feel like I don't really fit in, which was another reason why I was so amazed and thrilled to find you, right? Because we both have similar experience. But I've never understood it, because for me, food should be a unifying topic, right? We all should want clean food. We all want to have health for our families and for our children. And I would think that it would bring us together under this common interest, right? But it really doesn't. And when you dive into the history of our food supply in the US, you'll see that food actually did begin as a political issue. But what I think a lot of people may not be aware of is that it wasn't like the charge for an unadulterated food was not led by the left. It was actually
right.
led by Republicans. So just some quick examples. We've talked on this program about Dr. Harvey Wiley, right? He was the head of the Bureau of Chemistry, which became the FDA. And this was back in the late 1800s, like 1883. And he was the one that created that infamous poison squad, right? Where Congress gave him like $5,000 to study the adulteration of our food supply. And he tested different food ingredients that were currently in the food supply. He tested them on human subjects. And sometimes those subjects got so sick they couldn't function anymore. But it was Dr. Wiley who laid the groundwork for the formation of our Federal Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And he laid the groundwork for our food laws and regulations that we still have today. He was a Republican, right? The Pure Food and Drug Act, which was pushed by Dr. Wiley, and the Meat Inspection Act are considered the birth of the FDA. All right, those two bills permanently changed our food supply. It took the control from the people in the states and largely gave it to the federal government. It laid the groundwork for how our food supply operates today. And as I said, the Pure Food and Drug Act, that was pushed by a Republican, and the Meat Inspection Act, that was proposed by a Republican. It was Senator Albert Beveridge. And they were both signed into law by a Republican president, Theodore Roosevelt. So even the birth of our food supply and the regulations of the birth of the federal FDA, it came from Republicans. It wasn't from the left. Like, I don't think a lot of people are aware of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, part of this is because the more conservative folks are, I'm not sure I want to use the right terminology here, but less romantic, more rudimentary, more linear, more reductionist in their thinking, whereas the liberals have always been more about feelings and emotion, and so they can get into those sorts of things. And the conservatives tend to be more linear and reductionist, Greco-Roman kind of thinking, and so that dichotomy comes out to where the Shelley, Bysshe, and Keats, the romantic poets of Britain, have you ever seen anything as lovely as a tree? Republicans don't get that. All right. Conservatives don't get that kind of language. Whereas somebody who's a more liberal minded, let's all be in love, that kind of thing, folks kind of can get into that. And so for sure, the environmental movement as we know it grew out of a more liberal, I would say, creation worship mentality, and so the temptation, the tendency is for all of us to just bag the other side. Yeah. And so the result is, in my experience, if I go into the church and say, hey, guy, go to a deacon or an elder, or the pastor and say, hey, when we have our potluck, how about we don't use styrofoam plates? Let's use paper, or better yet, let's why don't we go down to the Salvation Army and buy a bunch of misfit plates and we'll wash them, and there won't even be a trash bag when we're done. In the average church, they look at you like, what? What are you, some sort of earth muffin, commie pinko tree hugger? And the problem is you can't even have a discussion. I'm the first to say I don't have it all figured out. And all of us have our hypocrisies, we have our inconsistencies, and I'm as guilty, but for crying out loud, can't we even sit down and have a discussion, a discussion about these issues, and in a respectful way, and not just bag each other? And so what's happened is the faith community has basically bagged the environmentalist community as a bunch of pagans basically, and the environmental community has basically bagged the faith community as a bunch of conquistadors. And when you look back and look at the conquistadors, look at what they did in the name of God. A lot of atrocities have been committed in the name of God. And so you can appreciate why there's this antagonism between the two. Each side has some truth, but the other side is so quick to bag the entirety of the other side that you can't even have a discussion.
Thank you for joining us on Beyond Labels. Our mission with this podcast is to make it accessible to everyone.
But we are behind a paywall because the issues we discuss are often subject to censorship. We've run into that, and so we have an extremely modest paywall to let us have the freedom to discuss the kind of issues we want to discuss in the way we want to discuss them. And you can become a member and enjoy all this content by clicking on the description box below. We look forward to having you join our family.